Warning: this episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Additionally, this episode's reading carries a content warning for brief, non-graphic description of vomiting. If that's something that you'd like to skip out on, you can skip ahead 8 minutes and 10 seconds to the 13-minute mark from the start of the reading. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that didn't make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisnieks. Listeners, I'm super excited to introduce to you a new friend for you and me, Dee Holloway. Dee, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Full disclosure, before we get going at all, you just emailed me because I've done work with other authors from your publisher before, so I imagine that probably Catherine was like, "Hey, maybe Tales from the Trunk." But other than that, this is the first time we're meeting, so we're gonna have some good radio going.
I hope so. I can't remember if she suggested it. She suggested a few likelies to reach out to, but I've listened to some of the episodes and I like the concept because I have a lot of trunked material and I know that everybody does. There's not an author out there that isn't sitting on an iceberg, basically. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really great angle, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. So, listeners, if you also are sitting on a whole bunch of trunked material, you could email me, hit me up on the Twitters while it's still there. This is coming out in a week and 2 days, so Twitter will probably still be there if you're listening to this on release day, but, who knows? Hit me up, because I'm always happy to have new guests. Dee, we're going to be hearing from, we definitely do want to talk about your forthcoming work, but right now we're going to be hearing from River's End. Is there anything we need to know before we go in, or any content warnings?
Content warnings. Actually, yes. The scene that I picked has a little bit of vomit.
Okay.
Not anything graphic. But if you have is it emetophobia?
I believe that's the one, yeah.
I liked this scene when I wrote it, and I like it now, but some people do have an issue with that, very understandably.
Yeah. And you will have already, at this point, listeners, heard a note of what timestamp you can skip to if you want to miss that.
So, River's End was a full-length young adult manuscript, which was the first book that I seriously queried to agents.
Neat.
At a time when I thought that I could find an agent and that I wanted to find an agent and have some kind of a traditional publishing career.
Mm-hmm.
And after, a good amount of time, I think probably at least 40 no's, I was like, all right, probably time to move on to something else.
Yeah.
But I still really do like it. I have a lot of fondness for the story as it stands by itself, but also because of what came out of it. It was the first of lots of projects that are set in a slightly magical version of Florida, which is where I'm from.
Oh, nice.
And so there's a lot of my hometown in it and the landscapes that I grew up in and, certain landmarks. And it kind of it was the launching point for a universe that I have returned to in a lot of different ways, and sold some stories out of short fiction.
Nice.
The the book that I have coming out in July is technically part of that universe in a very, the way that authors develop
Mm-hmm.
some kind of lore for the universes that they return to, whether those are high fantasy or science fiction, or in
Yeah.
this case, very low fantasy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited to dig into some of that after the reading.
So, from River's End. The weather-beaten planks of the dock beneath her bare feet were as familiar to Callie as salt air, or the flavor of the soda bread her father's mother made on St. Patrick's Day.
Mm.
She'd learned to swim before she could walk, and half her childhood had been spent cannonballing off the various family docks into the rivers or the lake. Just now, the distance between the pylons and the water of the Cocoa River, maybe 2 feet, felt like miles. Once in diving practice, she'd come out of a tuck too early and hit the pool surface flat on her back. The water, usually cradling and open, amniotic in its comfort, had dappled bruises over her spine and hips. Would it accept her now, after she'd been away for so long? Maybe it would turn to ice or sink away, leaving only the river bottom the moment her hands met waves. She drew a breath and jumped gracelessly. For a few minutes, it seemed like everything would be okay. Her limbs remained her own, her will controlling them to move her through the water, away from the dock. She pushed out into the river, stroking through the sun-warmed water. She wasn't sure whether the dampness on her face was from her splashing or from tears. She'd missed the dank river scent in her nose, the
Mm.
droplets prickling in her hair, the faint brackish burn in her eyes. She dove down beneath a small wake from a passing boat and shouted, "I'm sorry," into the liquid dark, the words muffled and distant. Whether there was anything in the river to receive her apology was up for debate. She was crying now beneath the surface, in a world where tears were just more liquid, a teaspoon more saline than the river had been previously.
Mm.
As she surfaced, a storm came up suddenly, as storms tended to do in coastal Florida. Wind whipped across the river, a hard west wind that churned the water into whitecaps. Callie turned over, lifting her chin from the water as she moved into a backstroke, her face open to the pelting rain. The scent of the wind reminded her of a day she'd stood on Mel's dock with her aunt and her grandmother, watching a storm unfurl on the horizon. Mel had murmured that west winds bring change, and her voice had a ring of recitation, something formal being imparted.
Mm.
The river convulsed as she strove for the dock, the waves beating and vicious around her head. The slight lilt of the river's current turned harsh and dragged at her legs, foaming crests licking her skin and twisting around her shoulders. She went under. Breath exploded from her lungs as she slammed into a pylon and scrabbled at the wood. A crab trap clipped her leg. In the darkening water, a deeper shade flowed out, clouding and dispersing in crimson tendrils. Callie surged up, sucking in water despite her best efforts, and clawed her way onto the dock. Lightning cracked nearby and thunder in nearly the same moment, but her body was leaden on the dock, limbs wrung out from exertion. The water she'd swallowed forced its way back up her throat, bringing with it a ripple of convulsions. Her arms and legs thrashed on the dock, drawing splinters, and she shoved herself up as her stomach wrenched. On hands and knees, she coughed and spat. Water mixed with blood joined the rain on the dock. In the mess, there gleamed a small, dark object. A stone she'd swallowed? A chunk of flotsam? Wincing as blood smudged her hands, she picked it up. A shark's tooth sat on her palm. Her Aunt Mel was in the nursery's office when Callie came looking for her, rummaging in a file cabinet. She looked up when Callie came in and made no comment about her niece dripping on the rug. Hey, get caught in that storm? Came up pretty fast. Then Callie saw her eyes register the swimsuit and bare feet. Everything okay?
Mm.
Callie sat down on a patch of tile uncovered by the rug and held her hand out to her aunt. Do you know what this is? Mel set her fingers on Callie's wrist, turning her hand but not touching the tooth. Shark tooth. You find that in the river? Bull sharks sometimes swim in from the pass.
Mm.
She didn't ask what Callie herself had been doing in the river, especially during a terrific storm. Callie curled her fingers around the tooth until its tip bit into her flesh. She had no words for its finding, as though when it erupted from her gut it had left a blockage or ripped away her vocal cords.
Mm.
Mel went about her business, closing the file cabinet and gazing out toward the vegetable garden, the rows of young palms, and the small collection of ornamental gazebos. She wore her rusty red hair, the only thing that gave her and Callie away as kin, in a long braid. Bits of it frizzed out from heat and movement. She dressed plainly, usually in cutoffs and a couple of tank tops, but Callie thought Mel looked like she'd grown out of the same ground the nursery was planted in. She had a hard time imagining Mel as a kid in the ancestral house with her mother. Fiona had been perfectly put together, straight toothed and friendly and precise. Even photographs of her fishing at age 12 on Callie's grandfather's boat showed a miniature lady. Most of the pictures of Mel as a kid were blurred, Mel turning from the camera or reaching toward it. The ones which depicted her aunt in stillness revealed a child and then a teenager, always wide eyed, slightly disheveled, perpetually uncomfortable. Now and then, Callie wondered if her mother had really liked her as a person, the way Mel seemed to. How successfully had Fiona's attempts to make Callie in her own image turned out? When had Mel grown into herself? Callie hated to think it would take her years to become comfortable with this new awareness, just when she thought she was good with who she was. Mel waited for her to speak, tapping now and then at the desktop's keyboard, her eyes settling occasionally on Callie as though she wasn't anything to be corralled or feared. Callie thought of her mother's mode of conversing. A friendly tack here, a winking tack there, a mild threat, a plea, until Callie unspooled. She didn't believe she'd have been able to tell Fiona this heavy thing, not if her mother had prodded all day. Then again, hindsight was 2020, and hindsight proved that Fiona had never been as forthcoming as she liked her daughter to be. She wanted to trust Mel. Mel was good to her. Mel was just friendly enough, not too cool, busy and independent, and all the things Callie wanted to be. And Mel had taken her in. Mel had given her the worst news of her life, both halves of it, snuggled together like holding hands. The tooth seemed larger than she thought a bull shark's tooth should be. She'd seen enough of them curled up on the river banks. They tended to collect in the gravel of inland springs as well, funneled in through Lake George and the St. Johns River for kids to search for and coo over, though nothing was supposed to be taken home from a state park. Most of the teeth were dime-sized or smaller. This one made a V-shaped blotch against the skin of her hand, nearly 4 inches around. Finally, her swimsuit dry and chafing, she stood up and dropped the tooth on the side desk next to Mel's elbow. Her aunt looked at it, and then up at Callie. I think you should keep your hands on that. Callie froze, her eyes darting between the tooth and Mel's calm gaze. What nerve she had left after her dip in the river failed her. She snatched the tooth up and bolted. And
Ooh, that's lovely.
thank you. I hadn't looked at it in years, but it was kind of fun to open that file again.
Yeah. No, that there's generally like there's two ends of the spectrum when people bring something they haven't looked at in years. There's either like, oh, this is actually pretty good, or like, ooh, yeesh, and like nothing in between.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really it's heartening to me to hear what you were saying before we got into the reading about this being sort of like a shared universe sort of thing that coalesces around the place where you grew up, because that's something that like I definitely wrote in that space a lot as a much younger writer, and I sort of haven't done as much recently, but like it was always something where like I would be doing these things, and nobody else who I talked to would be like, yeah, I do that, but then like things that I'd be reading in classes or whatever would still be like very much like you can't read like Stuart Dybek without like being in Stuart Dybek's Chicago or whatever.
Right. I love any kind of, regional writing that isn't, I mean, no offense to New York City. I live in New York, or to Los Angeles, but there's so many other places.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read something that's set somewhere that I've never been, and also somewhere that I'll probably never go, some random place in Indiana or
Mm-hmm.
Kansas, and it's just so like immediately transportive.
Yeah.
That in itself is magical, and then if you add an element of the speculative in some way that makes me think that the author has thought a lot about like urban legends in their area or
Mm-hmm.
mythologies, anything like that. It's just like, yeah, that's the stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the books that I think does this the best is not speculative in any way, but and I don't even know if it's in print now. Unfortunately, the author passed away a couple of years ago, but Kevin McElvoy's The Complete History of New Mexico, which is a collection of short stories, but that are all set around the same area, have a lot of overlapping characters, and it's just like it's one of those things that's just very evocative of the place that it came out of.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think that I would probably love it just as much even if I hadn't like actually gotten a chance to meet the author, as it was I got to know him briefly when I was an undergrad, and he was just like an incredible person. But neither here nor there, except that I was thinking about it the other day and I was like, I should tell more people about this book. Like, it's really good.
I'm adding it to my to read list. I like any kind of short fiction collection that's interlinked in some way. A couple
Mm-hmm.
years back, Sabrina and Karina came out, and that was really great.
Oh,
Set
yeah,
in
yeah.
Denver, and was just, yeah, it felt like you were visiting parts
Mm-hmm.
of the city that don't make it into advertisements
Mm-hmm.
or have nothing to do with the dominant industry there, or like the sports, just corners that locals know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice when anything does that. It's especially nice when like you get to, you know, like I don't know, like you were saying, like New York feels kind of cliche in some places, even to be like, oh yeah, that's the third character in my book is New York City or whatever, which like, fine, great, good, like, but also like if that third character in your book is like the same places that we've always seen in every other piece of media, it's a little bit less transportive than if it's like, you know, like you're saying, like these the back alleys, the dive bars, whatever.
Yeah, I think constantly of the part in the film Lady Bird where Lady Bird's teacher says something about how much Lady Bird loves Sacramento, and Lady Bird's like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't love Sacramento. And the teacher says, like, will you pay a lot of attention to it? Or something about that, like paying attention. And I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, yeah, you love what you pay attention to in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked just that way of thinking about it. And it made me think about what I pay attention to.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I'm gonna be chewing over that for a while now. I've never seen the film, but I
It's
love.
good. I'm not sure if it's as good as everybody says, but it is good.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and it definitely made me want to visit Sacramento the way that reading Joan Didion makes you want to visit Sacramento.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have complicated feelings about Sacramento because it is so hot there.
That's what I've heard. I have a couple of friends who live there now. Kind of oddly, they both moved separately, but at the same time. And like, I'd like to visit you. I'm sure it's a really cool city, but it seems really hot, even for like all of us Floridians.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's nice. There's some really nice stuff in Sacramento. I do not spend most of my time in the nice parts because I have to go there for work, and it's just being inside industrial things, and where it is just overly air conditioned and very loud, and that doesn't really, lend you a good sense of the city. But like the train museum, A plus, good trains.
All right. Good
And
trains.
the history museum, I've never actually been to, but I follow them on TikTok because they, at least for a while at the start of the pandemic, there was somebody from the like print shop there who was, constantly showing off like old pieces of type and printing up random things on their, 1850s print press. So, good stuff.
That is not how I spent my pandemic. I'm a little jealous.
No, I spent my pandemic watching that on TikTok. I mean, obviously the pandemic isn't like over yet, but the public seems to have moved on. And this being not my favorite subject, I think we should move on from that.
Sure thing.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, you mentioned previously having this book as, something that went out on submission to 40-ish agents and kind of what that journey was like, because like everybody, I mean, not everybody has the journey of like submitting to agents, not everybody has the journey of submitting to anything, but you know just because everybody has that journey doesn't mean that it's the same for every single person.
Yeah. So I was working on this project between 2016 and 2017,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the second like full length project that I had finished, and it was the first
Mm-hmm.
one that I sort of um, tried out some of the typical writer's tools like I found critique partners and I revised it extensively and I
Mm-hmm.
tried a couple of different formats. Initially it had only one narrator, but the the version that exists now has two narrators. It's split between two best friends, um,
Mm-hmm.
finding out essentially the same information but from slightly different
Oh,
directions.
neat.
Um, and so I consider it sort of like the exercise in like the most trad of trad publishing tracks, because it's like you
Mm-hmm.
have your critique partners, you revised it like four times, you research very seriously like who might be selling this kind of work. You use all the tools that are available to people who are looking for agents, and you send it out. You have your various documents. You have your cover copy, and you have your first 5 pages and your first 3 chapters,
Yep.
and all these different versions of like the same thing, basically, depending on what people want. And
Right.
you check to see, is there an email today? Um, is this one
Obsessively
of the
looking at Query
places?
Tracker.
Yeah, obsessively looking at Query Tracker. And is this the agent that, after 2 months no response means no? It's like there's a lot to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, there was a lot of like contemporary, fantastic young adult coming out that I really liked,
Mm-hmm.
and which is a trend that continues to this day. It's not
Right.
gone away in any real way, and it's the kind of YA that I'm drawn to. I like
Mm-hmm.
stuff that's almost real world, but with some sort of a bent. You know,
Right.
good like Maggie Stiefvater stuff and so forth. And so it didn't seem impossible that I would be able to find someone who represented that kind of material. And I had some
Mm-hmm.
very kind, rejections, and I
Right.
had
Yeah.
a request to revise it and resubmit it, and that didn't go anywhere. And that was sort of like the final thing, especially
Mm-hmm.
because my attention span for writing is like not what
Fair.
you need to make a career, which I've
Mm-hmm.
never wanted to have a career as a writer. I'm a library worker, and that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for doing it in your spare time as like a serious amateur pursuit,
Mm-hmm.
your attention span I think really dictates what you end up doing.
Right.
Because
Right.
by the time I decided to retire this, it was like, well, I mean, I could try to revise it and like make it differently shaped and send it out again, but I had gotten
Mm-hmm.
it really into writing romance, like adult romance, which is
Uh-huh.
completely different.
Yeah,
And
totally different thing.
I was
Like,
really focused on that for like several years, and again, did it very seriously.
mm-hmm.
And so, it just kind of it kept rolling, and it's not
Yeah.
something that I've ever decided to revisit or pull out of Google Drive and see if I want to do anything with it. Like I self-publish a lot of work now. But
Mm-hmm.
it's just there. It's hanging out.
Yeah. Yeah, and like that's the sort of thing where like it's very much with anything you're submitting, you have to like make a calculation at some point of like how much more effort do I want to put into it, and like
Mm-hmm.
very like it makes a lot of sense. Like it's never I try to never think of it as like giving up on a thing, because like you're always you learn things from that process. You got to figure out like what things worked for you. I don't know, you know, I can't speak for you, but like I've had pieces where like I came out of it with like a very clear idea of like things that really work well for me, or like came out of it with like, oh, this person is like a new critique partner who's like, you know, I really trust their voice on it or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think the longer you submit work, regardless of what kind of work it is or where it's being submitted or what comes of it if it never gets published, like after a point, it's the major upside to never really stopping is for me that it refines your taste. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you'll get a rejection that will just make you laugh because it's like, well, all the things you hated were things that I did intentionally
Yeah.
and were like significant stylistic choices and like this. So you're telling me about things that I like.
Mm-hmm.
You don't like them, that's fine. But having those kinds of moments, like I think is really important for writers because that is your taste being
Yeah.
developed. And being
Yep.
able to recognize that in yourself, I think is really important and not just be like, oh, someone didn't like it. Maybe they're right about this. I'm like, they're not right about your semicolons. You are right
Yeah.
about your semicolons.
There's space for infinite opinions on semicolons within the world.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that just made me think back to a rejection that I got 15 years ago, maybe. 15 sounds about right. God, that's a long time.
Pretty long
Uh,
time.
but like this little short story that I wrote, I think for a class, because I was like, I'd write things for classes. I already had built-in critique partners from that, and then would just turn around and start trying to sell them. But wrote this story about somebody who was a furry and sent it out and got a rejection from some market that was like, we only buy realistic fiction. Nobody wants to be an animal. And I was like, I can count 5 people I know personally off the top of my head. You, sir, maybe need to open your eyes a little bit.
I mean, leaving money on the table,
Yeah.
as we all know at this point, like the furries will buy what you're selling.
Yeah.
So,
And
oh boy.
I never sold that. I gave up on it pretty quickly, and that's at this point it's 15 years old. I'm afraid to even go look at it again necessarily, but like these are the things that happen, and it's important. Like like you said, the like sometimes you get a rejection that makes you laugh, and like that's a bingo square right there of like rejection where they just like I've definitely gotten rejections where I'm like, oh, they just don't get it, where it was more just like I was young and willful and like very like deflecting with anger. But there's definitely you know there's a difference between that kind of, oh, they just don't get it, and like the kind you're saying where it's like, these things that you hate are the things that I did intentionally because I love them.
Yeah. You know, I would say the vast majority of rejections that I get are form, which is fine. That's my preference.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and then one will be personal, either in like a good or bad way. And then every now and then there's one where it will happen spontaneously. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
one where like we're at cross purposes, like this would never have worked. And now we know.
Yep.
Like, and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like, every rejection is a win. Like, obviously, an acceptance is a huge, major, awesome win, but like, every rejection, you're putting yourself out there. Like, that's hard work and it deserves to be celebrated.
It is. It's a difficult habit to get into. But for me, at least, I think it has been true that the more of them you rack up, like the less it stings.
Mm-hmm.
These days, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, what's next? Like, do I have
Yep.
anything lined up that takes simultaneous submissions? If so, then we'll send it away.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely like, and like we should say, it never makes it so that it will never hurt. Obviously, you're always going to get rejections sometimes that are like, oh yeah, that actually, like, that one still is rough, but it definitely, the longer you do it, the less every single one of them feels like your world is ending and you're never going to do anything successful ever. With all of this rejection talk going around here, I wondered if we could talk a little bit about your alternate history novella, Little Nothing, which is coming out from Queen of Swords Press this July.
Sure. Yeah, so it'll be out mid-July from the lovely Queen of Swords, and it is an alternate U.S. history set, surprising no
In
one,
Florida.
in Florida during the lead up to the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, I don't even remember how this happened, but I thought it would be fun to write like a longer form version of the poem The Highwayman,
Oh, uh-huh.
which is an English poem and it's about, English bandits and red coats and that kind of thing. And I was like, well, I mean, red coat's basically a gray coat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do I make this nice and gay? And so the highwayman is a highway woman. And then the narrator is Bess, the landlord's daughter, who in this
Mm-hmm.
case, her parents are innkeepers. They own an inn that's sort of like the crossroads of their little backwater near the Everglades that's frequented
Mm-hmm.
by lots of scoundrels. Um, and the highwayman in question is just the consummate weird horse girl, which I am also a weird horse girl. And it was very fun to write the weird horse girl's long suffering girlfriend instead.
Mm-hmm.
Who's like, oh my god, these horses again, because the speculative element, the all element is that the horses in question are like a native breed of like a water horse that they
Oh,
kind of
uh-huh.
drew from like kelpies. So
Nice.
they've got nasty teeth. They're a little bit fey, um, you know,
Excellent. Excellent. Yep.
and yeah. So the it's just a rollicking backwoods good time.
Excellent. Very, very important question about this inn. Approximately how many beds does it have? Like, more or less than only one.
Um, well, the girls share like a bedroom and they each have a single bed because this was the 1860s. They had not
Mm-hmm.
invented, I don't think, the California King yet.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I think it is established at some point that Bess is like a very rowdy sleeper. And occasionally Johnny gets like sick of this and goes to her own bed.
Okay.
It's
Fair
nice to have your
enough.
own bed to go to sometimes. And it's like a sleepover, right?
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, that is very exciting. Uh, I'm wondering if you can, obviously without giving too much away about it, but you mentioned that it in some ways ties into other work, including River's End, that you've done in this sort of alternate Florida. Can you was that something that you set out to do from the beginning, or was it something that just kind of like came up in the middle and you were like, oh, actually?
Well, River's End got away from me.
Mm-hmm.
I finished it and then I was like, I love this. This is perfect. This is just what I want to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a novella that was actually about Callie after the end of River's End as an adult and dealing with some things to do with her aunt Mel, who we meet
Mm-hmm.
in the excerpt. And I also wrote a full length novel about Mel as a teenager in the 90s. And you can read that one because I gave it my college go because
Mm-hmm.
I really believed in that book and I thought I could sell it traditionally, and I didn't. So I published it
Mm-hmm.
myself because it's fun. It's very like The Craft meets Blue Crush. It's about like hanging out at the beach with your codependent, evil best friend and making bad decisions and maybe a
Right,
little
perfect,
light
yeah.
witchcraft. um, and then I
Haven't
also
we all
started
been there?
writing. Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a vibe that if we didn't live through it, that we're very attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, witches are having a moment in pop culture always.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wrote a lot of short fiction that I tied in either overtly or more covertly and kind of for myself. And some
Mm-hmm.
of those pieces I managed to place, and I was always kind of surprised by that.
Nice, yeah.
Including one, there's two that have the horses that are in Little Nothing, so you can kind of get a glimpse of them beforehand if you want. One of them was included in the anthology Equus from World Weaver Press,
Oh, neat, yeah.
and then the other one was published by Luna Station Quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
That one I thought was really fun because you meet the devil. Who doesn't want to meet the devil?
I mean, I guess it depends a little. Like, are we talking like Lil Nas X Montero Devil, or
Actually, kind of more in that direction. It's like a very sassy, like um, Tim Curry kind of devil.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, I can
so
get with that.
not like navel gazing Milton Devil
Mm-hmm.
or like classic Christian Devil who's not super fun.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for like Milton's navel gazy devil, but also like
I do
I
love
don't.
Nice Guy Lucifer. I'm a Milton simp. Like,
Yeah. The hard part about Milton is that they hadn't invented quotation marks yet, so you really have to be paying attention to
yeah,
know
pay
who's
attention.
talking.
Yeah, that's why it helps to read it out loud. You do funny
Yep.
voices.
Oh my god, that's what I did. That's how I got through Paradise Lost in college, so that I actually knew who was talking, was giving everybody funny voices.
Yeah, it's the only way. I highly recommend it to any college students who might be listening and are also English majors.
Listeners, if you're planning on taking a class on epics, a class on Milton, whatever, this is the pro tip.
That's my only advice, really.
I mean, I could probably come up with other advice, but that's that's the most important piece of advice I could think of for reading Paradise Lost. Really good, just hard, especially when you're a college student and your usual reading time is after a day of classes and your room is warm and the text is a little bit dense, and the next thing you know, it's an hour has passed and you've lost your spice in the book, and you know
I
all
remember
those.
when I was reading Paradise Lost, I was working in a restaurant and um, I would, whatever book I was reading for class, I would have, up at the counter with me,
Mm-hmm.
read between customers. And I remember my boss was like, Paradise Lost. Is that about Jesus? And I was like, what? I don't know how to answer that.
I mean,
uh,
it's concerned with sort of.
yeah, I was like, Maybe you should just read it.
Yeah.
You're not gonna. I'll read it to you
Yeah.
by the meat slicer. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That epics class was a good class. Just thinking, just suddenly thinking back on it. Also, I glanced over and saw, I mean, not the same translation I was reading in college. I think we read the Fagel's Odyssey, but I've got the Emily Wilson Odyssey over on my shelf. Uh,
I still haven't read it. Although I think she announced an Iliad as well
oh, fantastic!
recently.
I want that if she's doing it because her Odyssey is great. Like
Yeah,
really, really good.
I always liked the Iliad more, but once they're both out, I'll be like, okay, we'll read both.
Mm-hmm. Now, if she'll do the Aeneid, then I can have three of the four epics I read in that class, all from the same translator. That'd be pretty cool. But, I understand as a classic scholar focused in Greek epics that she wouldn't necessarily want to do a Roman epic as well. But,
I guess I never thought about whether Greek scholars have strong feelings about Virgil, but they probably do.
yeah, probably. I, they probably have some feelings about the fact that Virgil starts off the Aeneid with, like, Homer was a little bitch and I can do what he did twice as well as he did in half the space. Which is not a
Uh,
which is not a direct quote. This is me paraphrasing both Aeneid, both Virgil and my epics professor from college, who I cannot imagine him saying anything like that, but it's funny to
the
imagine.
spirit is there. I'm sure
Yeah.
that the spirit is intact.
Imagine a, kind of balding, gray haired guy, neatly trimmed white beard, matches his socks to his tie, and is always in socks and sandals. Imagine him saying that. Just leave that little treat there for everybody who definitely. Well, no. Some of my friends from college do listen to this, so like they know who I'm talking about, but most of you have no idea exactly who it is, and that's fine.
I think if you went to an American university, you have met that guy,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
either
Especially like if
as a
you
grad
did any
student
sort of
or a professor.
yeah, if you took an English class, if you went to a liberal arts school, you'll have met this guy. Hell, depending on where you went to high school, maybe you met this guy in high school too. Like, I can't say. So we're sitting here right now, and I just heard this weird sound in the room, the podcast room, and I'm wondering, and this blue police box showed up. I'm wondering if we can take a step into this time machine at this point and go back if there are any words of wisdom, words of encouragement that you would like to offer to a younger, less experienced D. Holloway.
That's a really good question because, like most people, I think I started writing in high school and didn't really think about what it means,
Mm-hmm.
and it became a habit that I was in before I really thought about why I liked it or why I wanted to do it or what you can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I guess I would tell myself to be a little more intentional,
Mm-hmm.
but also it's so hard to imagine myself as like an MFA. So I think I made the right decisions ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I
yeah, I
mean,
think younger people like you can say, you can be serious about yourself, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You don't have to downplay it. Like if you feel compelled to make art, like you're allowed to explore why that is
mm-hmm.
and not feel self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
And to some extent, you are also allowed to want grown-ups to take you seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. And like that's something I think that's something that's really important at every step if you like whatever level of writing you want to go after, if you're going after that. Like, I definitely, when I was in college, I went to college for creative writing, and took a lot of English classes because that was part of it, and got an English minor because it was two extra classes I would have taken anyway. Uh, but like, if you, if you go to through something like that, like I was constantly, people would ask me, at the time, like, oh, what are you doing in college? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm getting a major, and do you want fries with that? And you know, and that sort of thing, like, there's, it makes sense to be like, to be on the defensive a little bit, and to like, want to preemptively like counter people's arguments of like, oh, but you're never going to do anything with that. But also like, be proud of what you're doing, like, whether, you know whether you're writing it to stick in a drawer, or writing it just to show your friends, or writing it to try to get published, or writing fan fiction, uh, which is just as valid as any of the other choices. Like, all of those things, you don't have to be ashamed of, and you like shouldn't be ashamed of doing that, because that's hard work.
Yeah, and I mean, the current moment is just attacks from all sides on creative pursuit, whether professionally when not wanting to pay writers, or
Mm-hmm.
um, just culturally, and the devaluation of the arts in general. I mean, I'm a big fan of learning because it's fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't say that my undergrad degree, was anything other than just learning how to learn, learning
Mm-hmm.
ways to think, practicing thinking, reading things I wouldn't have normally read. Like, all of these
Mm-hmm.
things are valuable in and of themselves.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about writing too, is like we were talking about at the beginning, everybody is on an iceberg of work that will never be published for some reason, or won't see daylight, or you don't have any intention of doing something air quotes
Mm-hmm.
serious with, that is still building your desire to make more and your ability to do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it pays its own way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think it's important to say, and like, something I probably have neglected to say a lot on this, because like, you know I think the vast majority, if not 100% of folks I've talked to on this show, have been people who have been published already in some extent, or are actively working towards publication, or in some cases are like, have a debut novel coming out, or whatever, and like that's their first, you know big sale or what. But like, just because, we on this show approach that in a, through that particular lens of commercialism, uh, which I really don't want to put stank on that word, but like, it's so important to know that like, you can write things and never want to or intend to sell them, and that's just as valid. And
Yeah,
like,
totally. And I mean, at the start of, by the time I was drafting and querying River's End, I had been submitting work since about 2012, so
mm-hmm.
about 4 years. Um, but that was, the furthest I ever went toward like traditional publishing. And for a while, I
Mm-hmm.
thought that I could make it work. And for various reasons, I moved away from that. And I think that, especially now, again, in the current moment, with a lot that is writing against outsider art, but also
Mm-hmm.
just art in general, like, you oftentimes you have the capacity to do whatever you want all yourself. Like, you don't
Right.
have to be beholden to an editor necessarily, or if you want, you can swap with your friends. Like building an independent writing community and being part of that is really something that I would suggest to anybody, regardless of what,
Mm-hmm.
if you have publication goals, but just like knowing people who do similar things, knowing
Yeah.
people who have overlapping skill sets, like being independent of the machinations of the big now three publishers is something
Yeah.
that will only get more important. And also keeping a journal.
Yeah.
I recommend keeping a journal, which is also a type of writing and not a commercial one, um, unless you have ambitions to be a memoirist.
Yeah.
But it's a different kind of writing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it is just for you. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's yeah, like that's completely true. I never thought about it that way. I've never been a consistent journaler. I was gonna say journalist for a second, then I was like, no, that's a different thing. Also, not a consistent journalist, but or a journalist at all. Really, haven't done journalism in any way since like one or two classes in college, but neither here nor there. Uh, yeah, no, that like yeah, there's value in all the ways that you can create and all the things that you can do, and like that's really like you said, like that's it's okay to take that seriously, and in fact, like it's good to take that seriously and like be defend that defend your right to do the things you like doing.
yeah, that's really why I think it's important for like the rejections that make you laugh, like kind of confirming what you suspect about your own taste. Like I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
important to develop your taste and your style, not necessarily good taste because that's not a
Yeah.
thing, or the right style,
Mm-hmm.
but to just know, in some deep part of you that like this story does what I want it to do. I'm satisfied by it. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm aiming for. And I think that most people my age and probably most people who go to traditional schools have a lot of unlearning to do as adults
Mm-hmm.
who make things. Because I definitely ruined myself reading music criticism for a really long time.
Oh no.
And now as an adult, I have to be like, what kind of music do I like?
Yeah.
They're just like, Chuck Klosterman just lives in my head. That's all I
Yeah.
have. No, it's not all I have.
Oh gosh, I'm just remembering the person I was in like 2006, 2007, and the amount of pitchfork reviews that I mistook for having an actual taste of my own.
Yeah. You have to iron the Hemingway out of you if you go to American schools and you want to write. You have to iron the pitchfork out of you if you like pop music or rock music.
Yeah. Especially if you're into mid aughts indie music. Like, my God, don't go on Pitchfork at all to begin with. You'll be better off for it. Like, they
Yeah, I
shit on
think
some really great albums and loved some albums that I just do not care for.
revisiting like their bad reviews from the past, I'm like, this seems dishonest.
Yeah.
You didn't like it then. Like, do you actually like it now? I don't believe
Mm-hmm.
you. Like maybe, but what's the point of this? Like if everyone now agrees that this whatever this is a classic album, then it doesn't matter what you have to say about it
Yep.
because your C minus review didn't change anybody's
Yeah.
mind 5 years ago.
Yep. Yeah. And like I feel like there's a wider thing to be said about that, which is like so most of my online socializing is in writer circles because I'm a writer and a podcaster and like that's what I do. But like I'm also in fandom circles that aren't just full of writers. And it's very weird being in those spaces and like realizing how author pilled you are, where it's like, oh, this isn't actually like this thing that's like blowing up on writer Twitter right now. Nobody else knows about it, and like,
Yeah.
and it's important to like have that perspective. Like the same, we can be, serious, genre people who shit on John Grisham or whatever, but like he's selling hella books.
Yeah, this is why I think that I mean a lot of writers are library workers and vice
Mm-hmm.
versa, but I think it is kind of the perfect pairing because library work will keep you very grounded in a way
Mm-hmm.
that like you said, getting author pilled if you're online a lot is so easy. And then
Yeah.
I go to work and I'm like, no, actually the average person is reading X, Y, and Z things.
Yeah.
Like the world is not ending, they're going to read it in 3 days and return it and get something else. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything has this huge moral weight.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially like, I don't know, it's awards season right now, and like I'm always thinking about like, oh, this thing won the Nebula or whatever, and it's like most people don't actually even know what the Nebula Awards are.
No.
They do like it is May the 10th today, and everybody on writer Twitter right now is having a good old time because of Bigelows Dickolas Wolfwood, who uh,
Single-handedly masterminded the most sales and
yeah,
yeah, that was crazy to watch. It was like, I mean, yeah, that's a
absurd,
really good
like
book, but
really, yeah,
how is
really
this
good
happening?
book. But it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you know, most normal people don't actually read novellas. Most like people don't, go and obsessively look like, oh, this won the Hugo and the Nebula. I fucking better read this now. Like that
The
doesn't mean
worst part
anything to lots
is,
of people.
in this particular case, for me, the worst part is like it's really common now to see like book talk displays at libraries of like,
Mm-hmm.
hot titles that are being discussed on TikTok. But even if I put this how you lose the time war on a display, I can't like frame it as recommended by Bigelows Dickolas.
Uh-huh.
Like probably not. I would probably get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
So
It's
their impact
that's a shame.
is simultaneously real world in terms of sales, but has to remain online,
Yeah.
not safe
Yeah.
for work.
Uh Kotaku did give it a little write up today though, which is nice. So like, people
Yeah.
people
Something
who
else
are
did too, maybe Polygon.
yeah, I think so.
Like when it broke containment.
Yeah. Which is always hilarious when these things happen. Like I'm I'm right now thinking about because I just finished reading Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle and thinking about the fact that I would not have believed you in 2016 if you had told me that in 2023 I would be reading a, you know, big trad pub debut horror novel from Chuck Tingle, best known for weird dinosaur porn that rose to prominence entirely because of some right wing trolls. And, like, just the arc of these things is ridiculous.
I did he publish Camp Damascus under Chuck Tingle?
Yep.
That's interesting. I mean, good for
It's,
him, but I
yeah.
feel like if people read it, like, if the average person encounters it at the library and is like, this sounds cool, I'm gonna check it out. And then it's like, I liked that. Who's this author? Like, what is gonna happen?
I mean,
I'm gonna have to be like, well, I'm sorry, we don't have any more of his books.
yeah. The, like, what I,
And we won't be buying them either, probably.
the nice thing at least is like, a Tingler is cheap. You can get a lot of Tinglers for not a lot of money. B, he does like the jacket copy on the back does say like, this is who Chuck Tingle is, this is why you should know about Chuck Tingle or not. But like it's still, you know, it is wild to me because I am in this place where like again, author pilled. And like if I said Chuck Tingle to most people, they would at best be like, weird gay meme porn.
Yeah.
And
Like,
it's like,
not sure what this name is supposed to suggest.
yeah, actually, I mean, yes, but also no. And also, like, let me tell you, like, this is an incredible book, and, it has some good callbacks to the wider Tingleverse, but also it's just like, you don't have to know about. It's the good kind of self-referential. It's not the bad
Mhm.
kind of self-referential. But yeah, listeners, be on the lookout because I am going to be talking to Chuck in a couple of months on this very show. So,
Exciting.
spoilers. I'm actually talking to him tomorrow. I'm freaking out. So that's how time works. But yeah, like being author pilled is wild, and you need to know that not everybody is author pilled. That's the that's the
Yeah.
lesson here.
I mean, definitely. And what was that? In addition to many other effects of like moving away from traditional publishing goals, like you will definitely get less author bill.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly you don't have to pay attention to it as much.
Yeah.
And it's like these days, partly because Twitter is now what it is, and partly because I've curated it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes stuff will trickle in, and I'm like, ah, yes, that feels like the bad old days of
Uh,
paying too much attention to book Twitter. But yeah, once it gets like third removed, you're like, the average person would find this incomprehensible, and therefore it
mm-hmm.
probably doesn't matter like to me.
Yeah.
Keep it moving.
Yep. Uh, on the subject of keeping it moving, and also on the subject of things that matter to you, is there anything else that you have out now or that you have coming down the pipes that you'd really like our listeners to know about?
Most of what is about to arrive is various pieces of freelance essay writing.
Fair.
Oh, a few years ago, I started being like, "Hmm, I want websites to survive because I love websites.
Mm-hmm.
I'm old,
Websites are good, actually.
so I'm gonna, find some that I really like to read. And eventually, I was like, I guess I could pitch to them too for like book and music reviews mostly.
Mm-hmm.
But I did just sell a story that I didn't think I was going to sell, so that's good. And that will be
Fabulous.
out in Lamplit Underground in June.
Oh, cool. Fabulous, fabulous. Uh, Also, speaking of things that are out now, hopefully, uh, unless you're getting like hella arcs. I mean, you're a librarian, so like you might be getting hella arcs.
I
Uh,
wish I got hella arcs. We get a few.
Publishers, send D hella arcs. Uh, is there anything that you have been consuming across the broader media landscape that you're excited about getting other people into?
Um, I've been reading. I finally picked up Sea of Tranquility literally today, which
Oh,
is the
nice.
new Emily St. John Mandel. It's very Glass Hotel-y, which I
Mm-hmm.
like. Because I mean, I've loved all of her books, but I really liked The Glass Hotel, and it really made me want to take to the sea,
Mm-hmm.
despite what happens. So that'll be enjoyable because she's always enjoyable. The Station 11 TV show was amazing. Um,
Yeah.
and then I had to reread the book, obviously. I also just finished a great nonfiction collection called Monsters of Fan's Dilemma.
Oh,
And it's
cool.
about what we do with the art of monstrous men, usually, but people
Mm-hmm.
who have done notably bad things and not. necessarily suffered the consequences in the way that non-geniuses would suffer consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was it was a really interesting read. It was not prescriptive. It was very
Mm-hmm.
subjective, which I appreciate. I like to kind of, do one type of book and then another type of book, and then I
Yep.
keep myself rolling. I read a lot of picture books
Yeah.
at work, and like I need grown-up books. Like I need something a little meatier.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really looking forward to the new B.R. Yeager book, which is
Oh,
called
nice.
"Burn You the Fuck Alive."
What a
Yeah,
title.
Yeager is one of my favorite, just super out there like indie horror writers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, good stuff.
Nice. Well, listeners, as always, links to all of those things, or pre-order links, as the case may be, will be in the show notes. Uh, Finally, before we get going, and I know this is a little bit of a fraught question in this, the year of our Lord 2023, but Dee, where can our listeners find you elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I am still on Twitter for what that's worth. I don't think that it's super useful for for writers anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but I am on there. I use Instagram more for book promo. You can find me there under my much older internet handle, Menshevixen. And then also on Itch.io, which is where I have zines, short fiction collections, that kind of thing.
Oh,
That is also
fabulous.
Menshevixen.
Excellent. Well, yeah, listeners, be on the lookout for that as well. Dee, thank you so, so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Hillary.
Absolutely. Listeners, stick around next month when Emma Mieko Candon will be joining us on book tour, and somebody will be joining us in the second half of June. I don't remember who right now. And then in the first Friday of July, stick around for an interview with none other than Chuck Tingle. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Lillian Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Twitter at Trunkcast, and I tweet at HBBisnieks, for as long as the muskrat wills it. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.